The following Ardelyx podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and cannot be considered as medical advice. Please speak to a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions.
Welcome, everyone, to today's session, our podcast, Gut Matters. I'm Andrea Shin, a gastroenterologist at UCLA, and I'm here with my co-host, Johanna Ruddy, who is the Senior Director of Patient Advocacy at Ardelyx. And today we have a very special guest with us, Susan Edelstein. She is a PhD and the Senior VP of Clinical Research at Ardelyx. She's been at Ardelyx since 2010 and has been involved in nearly every clinical trial conducted at Ardelyx. Susan's entry into clinical research began in 1996 when she was a postdoctoral fellow in the laboratory of Dr. Andrew Greenberg, who is an endocrinologist at the Human Nutrition Research Center at Tufts University. The laboratory research focused on the control of diabetes and obesity through genetic and metabolic mechanisms and actions. Although this research was done at the basic science level, the HNRC conducted numerous clinical trials. At Ardelyx, Susan collaborates with her colleagues to ensure that all of the clinical trials are designed to include a wide variety of patients with different demographic backgrounds. It's critical to conduct trials that are accessible to the relevant patient population, so the data that emerges reflects the patients that are impacted by the disease. Susan lives outside of Boston with her husband, who is also a scientist turned biotech executive, and they are proud parents of 3 adult children, including a pediatric gastroenterologist. Thank you for joining us today, Susan. Really looking forward to having a engaging discussion with you today on talking about why patient diversity and involvement are crucial for better medicines.
Thank you for inviting me. This is really exciting. I speak about this all the time, so it's nice to be able to have a broader audience.
Yeah, thanks. No, this is definitely a topic that I think is quite critical from the research side. And I guess we'll kind of just get right into it and talking about, in clinical trials, and I'm sure this is really important in the work that you do. Starting off with, the importance of why patient diversity in trials is actually important. And I'd be kind of interested in hearing some of your initial perspectives on that and what you think about when you're trying to think about recruiting, a wide range of individuals for trials.
Well, we can start by talking about, even at the scientific level, how drugs are analyzed even before they're in the clinic for their what's called ALMI potential, how they're absorbed, how they're distributed in the body, how they're metabolized, and how they're absorbed. So with different populations, the way a drug enters the body, is metabolized in the body, is absorbed and excreted, can differ depending on the demographic population. So we want to make sure that we have a wide variety of people so that we know that if the drug works or doesn't work, it's not because we've chosen to study it in this very small homogeneous population that may or may not have, the same way of absorbing and having the treatment impact their disease.
At Ardelyx, we're dedicated to improving the lives of patients by discovering, developing, and commercializing first-in-class medicines that advance care to patients with unmet medical needs. Learn more about us at ardelyx.com.
When we think about, translating scientific work about, looking into drugs that are being studied for any sort of condition, whether it's irritable bowel syndrome or any sort of health condition, we can imagine that their effects can vary from person to person. And there's, we do know, for example, in irritable bowel syndrome, people have studied genetic contributions to, people's risk of IBS, but whether or not even genetic variations can impact their response to a drug or to an agent.
Even people of different ages, different diets, different locations, even the amount of sun they get can impact their disease. It really is important to look at all of those factors when you're recruiting for a trial.
Yeah, that's those are all elements that are hard to capture when you're only recruiting a select group of individuals. So I can imagine that you have to take all of that into consideration when you're thinking about how effective is this going to be for the general population. We want to make sure that they're studied in groups of people who are well representing um, the people who will eventually actually take the medications.
Right.
In
Yeah, and
addition,
that's also important, is to provide access to all the different people that really need the drug, because um, people that don't live in a big city or don't have access to a particular type of doctor besides their PCP, which may or may not diagnose the disease, or really understand what they're dealing with. Mhm. So it's, the outreach is really important. And these days, the outreach is a little bit easier than it used to be, with all the different advocacy groups and social media that's available. So we do try to take advantage of that as
yeah, yeah, you kind of bring us to the next question that I wanted to ask you. In addition to the fact that we're trying to capture biological variation by making sure that diverse groups are being included in these different trials, um, how do you feel like, in terms of healthcare disparities, how getting diverse groups involved is important? How does a lack of the diversity potentially compound inequities or um, impact the access um, to these medications if they're not being included in the trials as well?
right. I mean, our trials can be a little bit onerous for people, because
Yeah.
they often require several visits over a short period of time to a doctor's office. And we're trying to figure that out now. During COVID, we did a lot of remote um, telehealth. And so we are trying to incorporate that into our clinical trials now. And because people who don't have easy access to doctors or hospitals, and if they're not located near a big city, they work all day. They can't necessarily take off 3 hours, every 2 weeks to go to a visit. So it's really important to try and include these people in any way that we can. Um, Even when we were doing our dialysis studies with dialysis patients, there are some dialysis patients that start dialysis at 5 in the morning. And if you have to have a visit with the doctor before you start dialysis, that could be a little tricky. So, um, and the patients can't easily change their chair time. So we we were really lucky with the fact that we had some dedicated doctors and nurses who would either come really early in the morning to the dialysis centers, or they would ask if the patients could change their chair times, to a more reasonable time so they could include the visits. But so there are all these like different aspects that you don't even think about um, when you're writing a protocol for the clinical trial. But we have managed to accommodate people as best as possible um, in that regard, so that we can reach a wide variety of people. We also try and utilize physicians who are really dedicated to research because oftentimes those doctors have a really close relationship with their patients, and they built a level of trust so that if the doctor says to their patient, you know, we have this new medication that may be helpful to you, and I really think you would be a good um, patient for this trial. And then, the patient really has, already developed a trust with their physician. So they're more likely to say yes, rather than just, you know, putting out some sort of recruitment advertising thing saying, hey, call this number if you're interested. Mm. Because there is a lot of distrust out there. And, when you just say the word clinical research or clinical trial.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a little more on that in terms of you were talking about the trust issue, or kind of where does that come from, and how does that kind of relate to this idea of getting different groups from different segments of the population involved? What's
Yeah,
this
I mean,
history?
before my time, which is already quite a long time ago, um, there a lot of clinical trials were done in prisons. So they were done in population who couldn't afford health care, and they were kind of considered guinea pigs, and not necessarily, it wasn't even in their best interest to participate in the study. And so these days, I think we've done a 180, and I think um, we are really cognizant of who we enroll in studies and why we enroll different people. And so, but it's important to talk to the people and tell them, um, look, this is why we think this drug may benefit you, but it may not benefit you. But even if it doesn't, it may benefit other people in the future, and you're an important part of this study. And really make them feel important, because they are, um, a really important piece of the puzzle in trying to analyze, why certain people do respond to certain medications while others don't. And so it's really important to build this trust between the physician and their patient, even before any mention of a clinical trial is made.
Yeah, I could absolutely see how building trust and having buy-in from the community and good transparent communication about the objectives of the research and the goals of the project are probably really important when you try and do this work, because you're trying to find this balance between making sure that everyone is well represented,
Mhm.
but at the same time, you want to be very clear about making sure that people don't feel that they're, being taken advantage of unfairly, but that they're given the opportunity to participate just like everyone else.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We had one physician who was an investigator in a couple of our trials. And whenever he had a new patient come into his office, he would say to them, I participate in a lot of clinical trials. And just so you know, if I think that you might be a good candidate for one, I'm going to let you know about it. And that's like there with his first interaction with his patient. And so when he does approach the patient, 6 months later, a year later, they're not surprised by the ask. And I think they're more willing to even consider it. So there's a lot of different methods to make people feel more comfortable about participating in a clinical trial. think it's important that that level of trust is established early on.
So you
Right.
mentioned the importance of patients in these trials, and obviously that's a given. And I'm curious about your ideas and thoughts on involving patients in the protocol development, right, from the very beginning, because so many times those of us working on those protocols of these studies are not patients with the disease state and are not thinking about some of the lived experiences that may inhibit patients from participating fully or keep them from even understanding the value of a clinical trial to even enroll. And so how do you involve patients at Ardelyx in that process early on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, in addition to looking to see if the symptoms are alleviated by whatever treatment we're giving them, we also have what are called e-pros, where the patient fills out a questionnaire, and so one of the e-pros is called a QOL, which stands for quality of life. We also want to know how their life is affected. And so, besides help asking them, about their changes in quality of life over the course of the study, we also ask them, things about how can we make this trial more, easy for you to participate in.
Right.
And, what's important to you? And so even if we, can we have some telehealth visits? Can we have fewer blood draws? Some people don't
Right.
like blood draws.
Yeah.
Some people really don't like having an EKG because, the sticky things really bother them. Or, you just don't even realize until you're
Right.
starting what can impact whether or not a patient's going to participate or not.
Yeah. Absolutely.
How can I, still go on vacation and participate in this study? So we try and ask them, how we can design the trials so that it makes their involvement easier without, we still have to stick to the inclusion-exclusion criteria and the
Right.
visit windows as much as possible. But there are
Yeah.
things that we can do to make their lives easier.
Thanks for explaining that. I know you and I, when I first started, we had some conversations around this same topic and around recruitment materials as well. And were they patient friendly? Were they culturally competent for a variety of patient populations to understand? And did they, not just language barrier issues, but cultural issues? Even the term clinical trial can be a very scary word for different patient populations. And so, how can we make sure that we're being culturally competent and communicating things the right way to our patients? So I love that you're involving the patients in this process to make sure that they fully understand and given they are giving their full understanding when they give that consent to participate. So to Andrea's point, there is no risk of a patient feeling manipulated or used, so to speak. So I think the way that you designed the clinical trial kind of division that you lead is so patient-centered, and I just really appreciate that.
And we now use the word participant because they don't even
Yes.
like the word subject or patient. It
Yes.
sounds like, they're not people. So
Yeah, I love
know,
that. Yeah.
we are cognizant of the language that we use when we write informed consent. And as you said, we do have it available at least in Spanish and English. And if we need other languages, we can do that too.
Yeah. How about disseminating the trial data to patients? I know a lot of patients that I have worked with in the past that have participated in studies haven't ever then gotten any information after the trial ends, like what happened. There's no publication. How do I know what happened with this trial? How do you handle that here at Ardelyx?
I mean, besides the fact that we do try and publish our data in as timely a manner as possible, and we present posters at the annual meetings. We also do send all of the data to the individual doctors after the trial is over. But whether or not the patients themselves actually have access to that real data,
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how
Yeah.
that gets done. But
Yeah. Well,
there is some clinicaltrials.gov also has
right.
the results of our studies, and then it's accessible to anyone.
And the great thing about our SciComms department too is that they take that data then and translate it into, very easy to understand, patient-friendly summaries, which I think is so fabulous for patients to be able to understand the sometimes confusing data that's coming out of trials. So
Everything's its own language. So
yeah,
it really, although the patients, I think, are so savvy these days, whether or not it's advocating for themselves or learning about their own disease state, even at a very young age, it's amazing how even the youngest patients seem to get it and figure it out and ask the right questions. And to give them the time to do that is also really critical.
Andrea, I'm curious from your side of things as a clinician and a researcher in irritable bowel syndrome. I'm sure you've been an investigator on a number of studies as well. And what's the physician's role? Sue spoke about the providers that are recruiting the patients from their clinics and making it very clear, establishing that trust so that when a trial does come along that may be beneficial, they have some patients in mind who might benefit. How do you handle that with your patients in the trials that you've participated in?
I look at recruitment as a very team-based process. And so obviously there may be needs or interests of certain, populations that I just am not knowledgeable about. And so, I may have a lot of knowledge about the patients that come and see me in the clinic, but there's a lot of people in the community
Yeah.
who may be, great volunteers for their research. And we want to make sure to get the word out and that people are, given the opportunity to be invited. So whenever we think about recruitment, I try to get multiple people involved who have, different experiences or different perspectives, and they might give me insights onto, hey, this is a population we need to think about, and if you want to recruit them, I would, give you these suggestions. And so that's something that we think about very intentionally. How do we make sure that we're getting the word out to people who are more, a wider range of people than just those who are walking in through our office doors.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a tough, it is a tough effort, but we have to make that effort.
Yeah. So is there a particular population of patients, like, you mentioned that the prevalence, as we know, we've talked about it before, the prevalence of IBS with constipation is much higher in females than males. Is it more difficult to recruit a certain gender? I'm just thinking about my husband who hates to go to the doctor, right? And so does that make it more challenging when you're talking about diversity in trials?
And yes and no. I mean, as the average age of the participants in our trial was 45. So right in the thick of like life and,
Right.
dealing with work and kids and the last thing these women wanted to do was go see a doctor because, they'll just deal with whatever the issue is.
Yeah.
And it's not life threatening, even if it is incredibly impactful. So it was a little bit difficult to enroll the women in the study, but we did have over 20% men also enrolled in the study. So it's just a matter of where you find the participants. And, since IBSCs generally, the people were fairly healthy, other than um, this one disease, which, there weren't a lot of comorbidities. So they didn't necessarily go to, the secondary GI docs.
Right.
Or sometimes we recruited in gyms because that's where they were.
That's awesome.
And then, as far as recruiting women go, it's so interesting. And I went to a talk once where they were the company was doing a trial on an osteoporosis. And so they were trying to recruit older women. And the older women, like, really, they were like, oh, we can deal with it. It's not a big deal. So then they said to the same group of women, well, even if you can deal with it, think about, if we find a treatment for this, it will really impact your daughters and your granddaughters. All of a sudden, they have lots of participants because people really do want to help others, even if they don't help themselves either. So it's
That's
often how you
interesting.
talk to the patient too.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that communication piece, Andrea and I have talked about it so many times that how you communicate to patients about a certain disease state is so important for building trust, for building that, like what you just said, that sense of wanting to help others and being altruistic in that kind of thought process, even if it's not immediately beneficial to them, it may benefit someone they love down the line, which is really, really interesting. I'm curious what you would say to patients who maybe have thought about, have seen recruitment materials at their gym or on Facebook or wherever they may have seen these recruiting information for different trials. They're just not sure. Like, what would you say to patients about the importance of their participation in clinical trials?
Yeah, as I said, it's all a matter of trust. And I would really tell them to look at the protocol, to really, look at it carefully, ask a lot of questions, because they may have like some misconception about something that they have to do that may or may not even be true, and it just be a misunderstanding. Ask other people too. When we're doing the dialysis studies, there was a lot of talk from one patient to the other. Well, this is a great trial to participate in, but this is one of the side effects. Like, patients really are good advocates for each other.
Right.
So they can disseminate information and really help align other people's fears too.
Yeah, that's great. Andrea, what would you do? And what advice do you give if a patient were to come to you with, hey, doc, I saw this trial for this, for IBSC. Do you think it's safe for me to participate? What advice would you give them?
I always thank people who are interested in volunteering for a study because without their time and effort, the progress that has been made, the treatments that are now available just wouldn't have been possible.
Right.
I definitely am always happy to talk to patients about research opportunities. Um, and so if someone comes to me and shows me a study that they're interested in, I try to give them, my best advice in terms of whether or not they're a good match
Yeah.
first, and then I definitely encourage it, and I really appreciate the people who take an interest in doing that, because just like Sue was saying, you're helping other people down the line, even though it may not have an immediate impact on you today. So that, I mean, it's a really wonderful thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Sue, it was so lovely to have you join us today. I so enjoy working with you at Ardelyx, and I learned so much from you every time we have the chance to speak. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing about the role that you have that's so critical for meeting significant unmet medical need amongst our patients. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.